The last theory we're going to talk about, social structure theory, we're going to talk about is the cultural deviance theory. It's also referred to as the cultural conflict theory. A bit of an overview. This theory combines elements of both strain and social disorganization theory to explain how those living in lower class neighborhoods react to isolation from the rest of society and economic deprivation. Because this lifestyle is extremely frustrating and draining, members of the lower class often create their own subculture, which is a social unit with its own rules and values. The middle class culture emphasizes hard work, delayed gratification, and education. The lower class subculture emphasizes excitement, toughness, fearlessness, immediate gratification, and street smarts. The lower class subculture has many followers because it is easier to fit into than the middle class culture. The people living in the lower class may feel forced to violate the law because they obey the rules of the deviant culture in order to fit into their surroundings. Under this theory, lower class children learn at an early age that they are never going to measure up to middle class values. Meeting with continual failure, they become frustrated, they drop out of school. Those without high school diplomas have a difficult time functioning in modern society. A high school degree is a minimum requirement for many jobs, and those with degrees constantly obtain higher income and occupational status, while those without it are more likely to be unemployed or high school dropouts, and they're more likely to live in poverty, join gangs, and have continued involvement in criminal activity. So that's our overview. Let's go into some of the specifics. In 1958, sociologist Walter Miller attempted to detail the values that drive members of lower class subcultures into delinquent pursuits. Miller described lower class culture as a long established, distinctively patterned tradition with integrity of its own. Miller also outlined what he termed the focal concerns, or key values of delinquent subcultures. Such concerns include trouble, toughness, smartness, excitement, fate, and autonomy. Miller concluded that subculture crime and deviance are not the direct consequence of poverty and lack of opportunity, but emanate from specific values, characteristics of such subcultures. Just as middle class concerns with achievement, hard work, and delayed gratification lead to socially acceptable forms of success, according to Miller, lower class concerns provide a path to subculturally recognized success for lower class youth. Miller found that trouble is a dominant feature of lower class culture. Getting into trouble, staying out of trouble, and dealing with trouble when it arises become focal points in the lives of many members of lower class culture. Miller recognized that getting into trouble is not necessarily valued in and of itself, but is seen as an oftentimes necessary means to a valued end. Smartness was described as the capacity to outsmart, outfox, outwit, dupe, take, or con another or others, and having the capacity to avoid being outsmarted, outwitted, taken, or duped. In essence, according to Miller, smartness involves the capacity to achieve a valued entity, which material goods, personal status, through a maximum use of mental agility and a minimum of physical effort. Excitement was seen as a search for thrills, often necessary to overcome boredom, which is inherent in lower class lifestyles. These include fighting, gambling, if it's men, picking up women, making the rounds. Autonomy, as a focal concern, manifests itself in statements such as, I can take care of myself and nobody's going to push me around. Autonomy produces behavioral problems from the perspective of middle class expectations when it occurs in work environments, schools, or other social institutions built on expectations of conformity. Miller explains that These subcultural values are handed down from one generation to the next, and in this process, he has called it the cultural transmission. Gang culture. Under the cultural deviance model, the assumption is that kids will be drawn to the culture of the gang. If they feel alienated from the normative culture, they can find a home in a gang. In disorganized areas, gangs are a stable feature that attracts these kids. The decision to join a gang becomes a turning point in one person's life. The more embedded into the gang, they're less likely to leave. It also affects their education attainment. Kids who join gangs are more likely to drop out of school and not pursue higher education. Theory of delinquent subculture that was developed by Albert Cohen. Cohen's basic assumption is that most juvenile criminals are members of delinquent subcultures. Subcultures are defined as subsystems or anti-systems of society with their own attitudes and norms that often contradict the moral concepts of majority society. According to Cohen, the union of young people into subcultures is the result of adjustment and status problems of their members caused by the inequality of the existing class society, and that has been referred to as status frustration. For example, a boy from the lower classes always strives to adapt to higher social strata, but is confronted with expectations and goals that he cannot fulfill due to his social background and cannot achieve due to rigid social structures, referred to as the middle class measuring rod. In direct comparison with middle class boys, he has to recognize his own low status, poor prestige, and little chance of success in business and society. The resulting problems of self-respect ultimately lead to the merging of several such boys into alternative subgroups, which are defined by their separation or differences from the unattainable middle class. According to Cohen, these delinquent subcultures are characterized above all by their deviant values and morals, which enable their members to gain prestige and recognition. The behavior that is displayed within the subculture is fundamentally different from that outside the subculture because of these new norms. For society as a whole, they seem deviant and often criminal. As an alternative status system, however, subculture justifies hostility and aggression towards non-members, thereby eliminating the possible feelings of guilt. Delinquent subcultures are, according to Cohen, non-utilitarian, in that the deviant actions are not committed on the basis of economic rationality. Malicious. The purpose of delinquent acts is to annoy or even injure others. Negativism. Criminal acts are committed precisely because of their prohibition in order to consciously reject conventional values. Versatile, in the sense of various delinquent behaviors that occur. Also focuses on the momentary pleasure. Resistant to external pressure of conformity and loyal towards their own group members or values and norms. That's what these delinquent subcultures are. And the example that is used in the book, and that's what Cohen focused his study on, was gangs and using gangs. And that's what he wrote about in his book, Delinquent Boys. Subculture view, as I just said, was focused on juvenile delinquency and gangs in particular. But it's not, one of the criticisms of this is not overall the view of criminal behavior in general. So keep that in mind. The theory of differential opportunity. This theory combines the strain and social disorganization principles. Richard Cloward and Lloyd Olin's 1960s research explained a gang-sustaining criminal subculture. Again, the study of gangs, and there's a number of criminologists that have, and a lot of these studies stem from that. According to the theory of differential opportunity, working class juveniles will choose one or another type of subculture. I have gang in parentheses, gang, subculture, type of gang. Subculture adjustment to their anemic situation, anemic situation, depending on the availability of illegitimate opportunity structures in their neighborhood. And they view the presence of joining delinquent subcultures as originating from discrepancies between cultural induced aspirations among lower class youths and available means of achieving them through legitimate channels. In addition to legitimate channels, Cloward and Olin stress the importance of available illegitimate opportunities, which may also be limited depending on the neighborhood. Neighborhoods with highly organized rackets provide upward mobility in the illegal opportunity structure. Individuals occupy positions in both legitimate and illegitimate opportunity structures, both of which may be limited. Illegitimate opportunities are dependent on locally available criminal traditions. Delinquent subcultures have been identified with three types of illegitimate juvenile subcultures: the criminal, the conflict, and the retreatist. These types of gangs. These researchers put them in gangs: criminal gangs, conflict gangs, retreatist gangs. The criminal subculture gang occurs in stable slum neighborhoods in which a hierarchy of available criminal opportunities exists. Such a means of adaptation substitutes theft, extortion, and property offenses as a means of achieving success. Gang membership under this subculture is a learning experience. These juveniles are learning how to commit crimes and how to be crimes and look for crime opportunities. Disorganized neighborhoods, ones undergoing invasion or a turnover in the ethnic groups, a transition, are characterized by a conflict subculture. Such groups are denied both legitimate and illegitimate sources of access to status, so they resort to violence, defense of the turf, rumbles, right? The means of gaining a bad rep or prestige. That's what's occurring in disorganized neighborhoods. The retreatist subculture gang is viewed as made up of quote-unquote double failures. They're unable to succeed either in the legitimate or illegitimate opportunity structures. Such individuals reject both the legitimate means and ends and simply drop out. They're lacking criminal opportunity. They seek status through kicks and highs of drug abuse. These subcultures become the individual's reference group and primary source of self-esteem. According to this theory, delinquent gang members do not generally reject the societal goals of success, but lacking proper means to achieve it, they just seek other opportunities. So that is the theory of differential opportunity under the cultural deviance theory. Here is a concept summary of those views that fall under the cultural deviance theory and a breakdown. The next and final topic, social structure theory and public policy. If socially disorganized neighborhoods are the root cause of crime, what feasible policy strategies might be recommended to public policy makers? And Clifford Shaw remember that discussion from a few videos back. The Chicago, the theory, research that took place in the Chicago inner city area relative to immigrants that move out, they become transient, is the cause of the disorganization. And nonetheless, Clifford Shaw began by securing funds for the project area, the Chicago area project, they call it CAP, which consisted of a number of programs aimed at generating or strengthening a sense of community in neighborhoods with the help and cooperation of schools, churches, recreational clubs, trade unions, and businesses. Athletic leagues, various kinds of clubs, summer camp, and many other activities were formed to busy the idle hands of the young. There were quote-unquote street corner counselors. They were hired to offer advice to youth and to mediate with the police on their behalf when they got into trouble. Neighborhood residents were encouraged to form committees to resolve neighborhood problems. Despite the money and energy investing in the CAP this was between 1932 and 1957, its effects were never evaluated in any systematic way. But similar programs in other cities had a number of positive outcomes. The ideas of strain theory had tremendous impact on public policy via President Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty. Following in the footsteps of CAP, Cloward and Olin developed a delinquency prevention project, which was known as Mobilization for Youth, which concentrated on expanding legitimate opportunities for disadvantaged youths via a number of educational, training, and job placement programs. This program received generous private, state, and federal funds and served as models for such federal programs, as you've read about in the book, the Head Start, the Job Corps, and the Comprehensive Employment and Training Act, as well as affirmative action and many, many others. So, certainly some things have been put into place. The research regarding their success is still unknown. There is one more point I want to explore. I don't have a slide on it. It is in the book. I also have a video that is right after this video in the video lecture. I actually put it in the video lecture series, only a few minutes long. It's extremely important, and it explains this concept of broken windows. I don't think the book explains this quite accurately or even clearly. And kind of muddies two concepts together. So I'm going to flush it out here and make sure you watch the video. Broken windows theory holds that physical deterioration and an increase in unrepaired buildings lead to increased concerns for personal safety among area residents. Heightened concerns for personal safety, heightened concerns in turn lead to further decreases in maintenance and repair, and to increase delinquency, vandalism, and crime among local residents, which cause even further deterioration in both a sense of safety and the physical environment. Offenders from other neighborhoods are then increasingly attracted to areas perceived vulnerability. So in short, physical evidence of disorder is left unchecked, and then it leads to crime by driving residents indoors and sending a message to would-be offenders that a neighborhood is out of control. So basically, if there is a building and there's a window that's broken out of it, what happens is if it doesn't get fixed, the next step is, I'm going to break the other window. That's okay. Nobody's fixed it, so it must be okay to do. And then the next window gets broken, and then the next window gets broken, and so forth. People dump trash in a particular spot, and if nobody does anything with it or picks it up, people think you can dump trash there. So then people keep continuing to dump trash in the spot. And then it looks bad, right? Looks like a bad neighborhood. So the broken windows theory was initially and most notably put into practice by the New York Police Department, and you'll see that in the video, and there's a couple articles that are attached under additional materials in Moodle. but it's also been a fundamental theory for building policing strategies for law enforcement agencies across the country. The policies developed based on broken windows typically involved officers becoming more prevalent in troubled communities with the intentions of restoring order and reducing fear of major crime among residents. But what they were doing under the broken windows theory is handing out citations for minor offenses like vandalism, graffiti, and damage to property. And that was their hope by doing this, that they would stop it from expanding or the damage from getting worse. The other concept, this is where the book kind of muddies it, is treating these two policies the same, is the police would implement community policing. Community policing theory became popular around the same time, though, as the broken windows theory, and introduced into the law enforcement community. This theory is most accurately described, and I use the definition from the Department of Justice. Community policing is a philosophy that promotes organizational strategies that support the systematic use of partnerships and problem-solving techniques to proactively address the immediate conditions that give rise to public safety issues such as crime, social disorder, and fear of crime. Community policing and broken windows differ in practice in that community policing encourages officers to interact with residents in a non-law enforcement capacity and foster positive relationships with members of the community, whereas broken windows often involves issuing citations for the minor offenses to discourage more serious criminal activity. So that's the key distinction. Does it work? Some cities, New York City and Lowell, Massachusetts, have cited these policies as reducing the crime rate, but there are other views that state they do not reduce the crime rate. And there's a link to two articles, one from NPR, and the other one is from Frontline, which is a PBS news authority, that has that point of view. So take a look. They're very short articles, and make sure you check out the video on broken windows, which is next. And that completes our discussion of this chapter. Next week, we are going to move forward on a next series of theories. I think we have 2 more chapters to discuss theories on why people commit crimes, and then we're going to switch gears and talk about actual types of crimes.